first panelist, who ironically is the last bio that I read the first thing this morning, is Dominic Rausch Grace. And sorry, the beginning of his bio is kind of off here on the screen now, which is kind of ironic because it worked earlier. He is a graduate student at North Dakota State University, specializing in computer science. His research delves into artificial intelligence, technology, and policy, with a special focus on natural language understanding, the scientific applications of AI, and their ethical implications. He's contributed to academic literature through publications in reputable journals and conferences, including IEEE, TIS, FICC, and SPIE, covering topics ranging from quantum-enabled grid computing to deep neural network development platforms. Aiming to pave the way in the field of AI, Dominic aspires to become a research scientist dedicated to the development of safe, ethical, and capable artificial general intelligence. Going down the row here, our second panelist is Scott Meyer. Scott is the co-founder of Chip.ai, the easiest way to build, launch, and monetize AI tools. He frequently writes and consults on how to integrate AI into businesses and organizations. Previously, he taught AI to developers at Metacrafters, served as the inaugural director of the Entrepreneurship Center at NDSU, and founded and exited Nine Clouds, a digital marketing agency. Our third panelist is Ahmed Al-Asadi, and I apologize if I've mispronounced you. I got it. All right. Excellent. He is a scholar at the Chali Institute for Global Innovation and Growth and an assistant professor in management in the Department of Management and Marketing at North Dakota State University. He researches how institutional elements in foreign environments influence economic decisions of international entrepreneurs. His current research interests include international entrepreneurship, institutions, corruption, and the Middle East and North Africa region. In 2022, his paper with Dr. Christopher Growing, titled "The Contingent Effects of Firm Response Tactics on Firm Legitimacy During a Secondary Boycott," was selected for Social Issues in Management Division Best Paper by the Academy of Management. Our final panelist continuing down the road, or the row, is Zia Mohammed. And Zia is a cybersecurity researcher and PhD scholar at the Department of Computer Science at North Dakota State University. His research covers a broad spectrum of cybersecurity issues, ranging from AI regulations, impact of laws and regulations on society, and cyber insurance. His work is published in reputable journals and presented at prestigious conferences. He's also a Mancur Olson Graduate Scholar with the NDSU Chali Institute for Global Innovation and Growth. He's been featured recently in Cyber News, Dark Reading, the DC Journal, and Spectrum News newspaper for his valuable contributions in the field. So now that we've introduced everybody, we can go ahead and dive right in. And we'll start hopefully with just a quick brief introduction of kind of where you're coming from with response to this topic. What is your interest in AI regulation? And maybe just a quick kind of what is your kind of initial, I don't know, 20 words or less or something like that, position on it, just to kind of give everybody an idea of where you're coming from.
Okay, cool. My name is Dominic. Regulation. I'm a very technical guy. I'm the guy that does the math and the programming and stuff like that. Only recently did I start delving into the regulation because, everyone's familiar with Terminator, right? And the problem is people like to correspond AI with Terminator. And in doing so, there are calls for regulation that could create some safety measures, but could also hinder innovation. So it's a question of striking a balance, right? I'm interested in regulation because we want to use AI such that we can extract all the benefits from it, but not regulate it such that all of its innovation and development is suppressed.
Yeah, I come at it from the industry. I work in AI. I see it every day. And I think my dream is that AI helps more people build. And I'm worried that right now the regulation has been executive instead of legislative. And in doing so, it's been driven by people who are ahead. So what you'll see is the companies who have a head start in AI, like OpenAI, are going to ask for regulation, and those who don't are not going to ask for it. And so the famous letter that sort of sparked Biden's executive order was written and signed by all the people at OpenAI, but not people at companies that are further behind. So I hope that we give it enough time to bloom. It's really hard to imagine AOL and Friendster creating regulation for the internet in 1999. I think that's where we're at with AI.
Well, yeah. So Scott is a practitioner. I'm in the academic side, and I've discussed this actually this topic frequently with my students and my fellow colleagues. But I think that AI right now is really in its infancy, and any attempt to regulate it will be premature. And I think that's what's happening right now in terms of an institutional sort of effect on AI regulation. But I think what I'm worried about is we don't understand the technology or its applications fully yet for us to be able to discern nuances so that we can create regulation that can actually be, have a positive effect for everyone involved. So not just to benefit the OpenAI, the folks, and to, for example, not benefit the, startups. So it's interesting times we're living in.
I am from cybersecurity background, so I think of AI regulation in terms of cybersecurity challenges. For instance, everybody in the room would have heard about ChatGPT, but I'm not sure if anyone here heard about Worm GPT or Fraud GPT. Did anyone? Basically, these are some of the variants that come from the same model with different perspective in mind. They are designed specifically to forge emails, to write phishing scams, to spread spear phishing, to write malicious code, and to recreate some of the most famous attacks or ransomwares that have been in the past. So I believe that AI is a significant contribution, and it is the best, most popular thing for this society and growing tremendously. But there is no doubt that we need to put stop somewhere. It is not just the GPT, it is the things associated with it. We cannot limit the innovation and growth, but we have to put some stop. So refine some policies that promote transparency and accountability in this matter.
Excellent. Well, thanks for those insightful comments. Do we have any questions from the audience? If not, we have a few actually in the question and answer in the chat already. The first one, and I think that this is to everybody, is what are your thoughts on AI specific federal regulations? So I don't know, Zia, do you want to start? We can go back down the other direction.
I would say we are currently in the very early stage of regulating AI, not like European Union, who started the first regulation in 2021 and categorized the risk of AI into 4 different levels. The one is unacceptable, danger, and the stuff. But for now, in US, we do not have comprehensive federal regulation for now that is solely dedicated to AI, but we are moving to head it. For now, the first question is, do we need a global or maybe a federal regulation? Because whenever we talk about US, we talk about 50 independent regulatory bodies. And every company that I know of using these AI regulations have some sort of rules and regulation in place. For instance, if we talk about Microsoft, they have dedicated rules for ChatGPT. Some of them are content creation rules, some effectiveness policies. So every company has some sort of regulation. So whenever I think about regulation, I think about that scenario that what lacks in previous implementations. What if we just complicate the regulation process so much? So the better need is to identify what is in place, find the gaps, and move on from there.
Yeah, is this on? Yeah, cool. Yeah, going off of what Zia was saying, so if you check the whitehouse.gov website, they have their AI Bill of Rights. And I think the last time I checked, there were 5 pillars which they've been sort of identifying as areas for regulation. And what struck me, what I found interesting was that they're trying to, one of the pillars is big data. So the data that is available. And I think having a one size fits all regulatory framework would do society and I guess the economy a disservice. Because of the fact that you're at different starting points. So when we're talking about data, we're talking about, Fortune 500 companies, who are able to utilize that big data and engage in, let's say, corporate entrepreneurship or whatever is the case. But for the everyday sort of not Fortune 500 entities, I fail to see how how it would positively impact them, since they don't have that big data point to start with. So it's definitely an interesting time to be alive, and it's an interesting technology. But I think what's going to determine federal regulation is just how the population will use artificial intelligence and how will it be utilized. Because I mean, in my class, the excitement all has to go with a ChatGPT, and you can tell it to do this and tell it to do that. But under the surface of all that, it's actually, you're promoting the path of least resistance, right? So as our earlier panelists were saying about, cognitive ability and doing the work and things like that. And so it's we'll see what happens. Yeah, Scott, defer to you.
Yeah, I can go quick. I think it's important that it's legislative and not executive. So I think right now it's been very executive, and I think this is a big question that we should really have debates about in our societies and in our communities. So that's my biggest hope, is that it moves away from executive orders to legislation, because I think that's important, where we have those open discussions and bring in viewpoints. Yeah, I think that's the big takeaway. I think I would add what you were saying is that it's a lot more than ChatGPT, and we have a lot of regulation for potential harm in different areas. So a lot of breakthroughs have been made in the medical field. Recent publication came out showing how it outperformed radiologists detecting early cancer. Amazing article came out yesterday in Science that it has discovered more materials, like molecular materials, than we've discovered in the entire of humanity. So, but there's HIPAA already, there's regulations in these fields. So I think first we should use what we have and then look at additional regulation.
No, and I think this is a very important question we all need to ask ourselves. And I think one of the key challenges that all of us are going to have in navigating these regulations is whether the regulations people call for have a logical, honest basis to them, right? Because some of you who follow like OpenAI news know of all the drama that's going on. You know how it relates to some new technology they came up with, likely a derivative of the Q-star mathematical framework they proposed, right? You ask industry professionals, people that actually build this technology, they would say, yes, what they're doing is the logical next step. This is expected. OpenAI, on the other hand, is taking this logical next step and saying, everyone should panic. Everyone should panic. And the reason they're doing that is because they want to incite fear. They want to incite fear to call for regulation, because this regulation adds barriers, and these barriers make it harder for their competitors to actually get to a point where they can compete with them. So it's really a challenge. You want to question whatever you hear, especially from the big dogs in the field of AI, right? OpenAI will tell you that the reason they don't disclose a lot of information about their model parameters is for safety purposes. But they'll also tell you that it's so they can maintain their competitive edge, because the safety purposes argument, one, doesn't really hold. The competitive edge makes more sense. It would be a different story if they just said that, but yeah, I mean, yeah.
All right, thank you. It looks like we have a question from the audience.
A little bit, not a question. We do have two regulations, ITAR, International Traffic of Arms, and Export Administration Regulations. So when you say legislative, we have those things covered. I just wanted to add this. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions from the audience?
Will regulation ever keep up with the advancements in AI?
Could you ask it again with the mics for the people remote?
Will regulation ever keep up with the advancements in AI, which are moving at 10,000 miles an hour?
When I first started working for him almost 3 years ago, one of the first things he told me that I never forgot was that if you can think of a technology, it likely exists. It's just the bureaucracy won't let you know about it just yet. You know, and I think that's very, very true in the context of making regulation that moves, you know, corresponding to technological development, right? Is that tech is fast, bureaucracy not so much. So I think the question of, you know, having it go at the same speed, probably not. What they're going to do is they're going to try to be proactive, come up with things that would down the road end up, you know, regulating things. So they would basically regulate things that don't exist just yet, but they think may exist later on.
I think it'll be fascinating to watch interpretation of existing laws because you could see kind of a blurry line, right? If you have, for example, regulation on child pornography, and now you're creating AI child pornography, right? Like I would assume the courts will then reinterpret existing laws to say that also applies to this. And you could imagine the same thing gets kind of weird with personhood, right? If people start getting attached to AI avatars, like what kind of rights, if any? And so there's a lot of areas where I don't think we necessarily need new laws, but we might need new interpretation of laws to see what it applies to. And you've seen that with copyright and trademark, which is a really easy area. You know, so if you're creating anything, it can be used commercially, but you can't copyright it unless you've changed it 51% from the AI. So if I create a piece of imagery from Midjourney, which is an AI image generation tool, I can use it for my client, but they can't own it. Nike can't put their trademark on it unless I alter it with a human hand. So you're starting to see some interesting cases like that, where that's existing law, right? Copyright law, but then we have to apply it to this new world, which, yeah, it'll take years and years and years to get through all of those different use cases, I think.
So I think it depends on the age and the individuals in charge. So I noticed that the older the individuals are and the newer the technology, the more resistant they are to it. And as generations go by, so I'm born 1987, so I'm a millennial, although I don't identify as a millennial. But yes, I think that laws, what happens is that there's a chance for, I guess, human history to repeat itself in terms of how the laws and regulations evolved with, let's say, the internet and the different types of technologies that we've been having. But also, I think it'll depend on just the extent, whether positive or negative, the effect artificial intelligence will have on our way of life and the way that we interact with each other and how we not just with each other, but you know, with institutions and things like that. And I think only time will tell, but the way our current institutional system is set up, it's not set up for that flexibility. And so we're in a, you know, if you're pro AI, I think you have a mountain to climb in terms of getting that. Yeah.
There are some of the risks that are unacceptable. For instance, we all use some kind of social media platforms and sometimes perform online shopping. So most of the online e-commerce websites have recommender systems in place. For instance, if you go to Amazon and search for a specific calendar, maybe it will suggest to you similar products that goes with that. And this is what becomes risky. For instance, you want in future AI systems to predict and to manipulate prices based on your social profile, based on your spendings, and based on your specific criteria and needs. So this is where it becomes tricky. You don't want AI to play with human rights, to play with the social interactions we do, and to manipulate the responses based on person's perspective. It was very interesting to hear the last panel who discussed that what would happen if AI alters its behavior depending on the perspective or the person who is asking the question or query. So this really tricks me out.
And I would just throw, I mean, I think federal regulation is easy to put down. So I like bringing it local. Like it's fascinating to think about here at NDSU. Like, do we feel like NDSU has to show that a student's talking to an AI admissions counselor rather than a human? Like, is that something that we should disclose, or do we not have to, right? Do we have to disclose that it's online class is not being taught by a human, but it's being taught by an AI, right? So there's some interesting, I think, more specific examples for an institution like NDCU, which you all can affect much more than federal legislation, and probably feels a lot more appropriate for the moment, right? There's probably specific use cases right now that, I'm sure administration's thinking about, how do we use this to cut costs, work faster, get more students in, look at applications, who's more likely to come, and when do you then put in local rules to kind of say, we're not going to do that because of X, Y, Z. So I think that's an important discussion to have too, not just the legislative side.
All right, excellent. Well, again, thanks for those responses. We have an interesting question from online here, and I'll open this up to the panel, and that maybe not everybody will have an answer for it. It starts with, do you have a solution? So you need only respond if the answer is yes, or I guess if you have a no, and why. But the question is, do you have a solution to balance regulatory capture from big names like OpenAI, Meta, Google, and innovation?
I think one of the best things we can do is really emphasize that we want a variety of voices to actually come into the mix here when we're deciding the direction in which AI goes. Not necessarily just the big dogs, right? We want young entrepreneurs, we want professors, because the business people in the large AI companies, they're going to say whatever they need to say in pursuit of their own business interests, right? And business interests don't always, mesh with society's needs. We don't want to regulate it to a point where we can't innovate. It's like Mr. Meyer was saying here, the materials thing. There's AlphaFold. AlphaFold was able to come up with how many millions of protein fold structures. I remember reading somewhere that it would take one student the entirety of their PhD just to model one of those protein fold sequences. This thing can do millions in the span of a couple days, right? So when we listen to those calls for regulation, we want to make sure we're hearing other voices as well. You have people that advocate for open source, like Jan LeCun, president over at Meta, which, believe it or not, Meta is the one that's very transparent in everything they do. They explain exactly how their technology works, and they make it free for everyone. Jan LeCun will tell you that a lot of the things that people say, regarding AI regulation is simply just sensationalism for the sake of creating barriers. So listen to people like me, listen to like the people on the rest of these panel, everyone really. We want like a diverse set of backgrounds and experiences that contribute to the direction in which AI regulation goes.
I would say I'm pretty pessimistic because I think there's just a trend towards aggregation in the internet generally. And with AI, it's a trend towards GPUs, and who has them decides. One of the reasons why Microsoft immediately offered a home for Sam Altman and friends was because they need the GPUs, and Microsoft's giving them those, right? Without those, OpenAI can't build. And there's not many people in the world who have those. And so even without regulation, you are going to have a small number of companies kind of able to call the shots because they get to decide who has the compute, and everything else is built on top of that, right? So like what I'm doing is built on top of everyone else's large language models, built on top of NVIDIA chips. So I think the best thing we can do is actually encourage development of the technology and of the chips, So that's really hard to do though. So I think I'm pretty pessimistic.
I feel like that would lead to another regulation issue of them saying stuff like, oh, there's not enough silicon for us to develop more GPU clusters. We'll let Microsoft and Google be the only ones that can do it,
Yeah, exactly. We need a fair market. We need to play with rules. For instance, we cannot design regulations in such a way or influenced by such big giants that we cover the latest innovation, the new entrepreneurs, and the small and mid-sized businesses.
Yeah, if I can just quickly add on to that. So I think the solution would be to let nature take its course, especially at the very beginning, because we're really at the early stages of this technology and just the potential that it can have. And I would liken right now the era that we're in. It's similar to when the internet first came out. in the mid 90s, maybe early 90s. So I was introduced to it at the library in 1995. I would go and, sign up and get a computer for half an hour and hear the AOL, with the router and everything, and the modem, the dial-up modem. And look how far we've gotten. And this is maybe, 20 years ago, something like that. So I would say the solution is to let it be and let the chips fall where they may.
Literally, yeah.
Yeah, literally, and then see where we can come in and have all the people with the basically, yeah, the people who are really interested in this to see how we can, make it fair. But I think, yeah, just let the chips fall where they may, especially in this time period.
So it's interesting. That's a really good way to end this question because it ties in really great to actually 3 separate questions we have online that I'm going to combine into one big question for you guys. So one of the questions, and there is a common theme to these. One of the questions is, I think responding to Scott, what you had said about regulations hindering startups. But the person that wrote the question asks, how about the danger that it may cause without regulation, in the absence of any regulations? A second person asks about whether it's possible to identify best practices from AI companies, determining what's acceptable and unacceptable uses of technology, and to make these public, transparent, and actually making it so a user can determine whether the companies are living up to their promise, to what they've said they're going to do. And the last question responds to something you had said, Zia, which is whether we need regulations now or not. And so the person that wrote the question asks, could any postponement in addressing perceived challenges promptly through regulations actually result in a form of irreversible harm, a need to move right now? So again, there's a lot of different bits of nuance to this. We could spend the rest of the week, probably, if not the rest of the day, talking about this. We only have 15 minutes left of this panel. I would like to get one more question in. But if you want to think about portions of that and respond to that, I think that the question is, what kinds of regulations do we need? When do we know those regulations, and why, perhaps?
I mean, I can go ahead and provide some insight onto the first portion that talks about what would happen if we didn't regulate things. Now, me talking so much about regulation, that's not to say we shouldn't regulate. I'm saying what we should do is find a balance between regulation and innovation. We optimize safety and innovation, right? So the concern I have is the hyping up fears that aren't really existent. Like, this is Terminator. This is going to kill us all. Stuff like that, versus fears that are very, very real, very prevalent, like bias, misinformation, job displacement. I think, sure, if someone smarter than me can come up with some sort of regulatory policies that, accommodate like people being displaced by artificial intelligence, absolutely enact something like that. If you can come up with something that ensures that companies have to disclose the data that they use in training their models, absolutely do something like that. I mean, we still don't know from a lot of places where they get their training data from, but yeah, absolutely. It's like there are very, very real challenges that correspond with AI. And for me, it's a question of, can we formulate regulations such that they accommodate these very real issues as opposed to the ones that are simply sensationalist?
Yeah, this will have to be my last question because I have to go, but I think an important step will be using regulation to ensure competition and to ensure niche versions. So you could imagine, for example, in the education world, like, do we want to have our students that are, my 4th grade daughter, like, does her chats get to be used as training material? Do her images get to be used? And I think there's a line where we're not going to feel comfortable. And so I think what will help that is actually labeling. I think one thing Adobe is trying to do is everything they're working on is purchased from artists, right? So it's not scraping the web and taking images from others as training material. And so I could see a world where different, an AI tool would be labeled as safe for kids, right? And maybe you have to pay more for that, but then we require schools to use those AIs that have been certified as XYZ. So I could see something going that route where you're increasing transparency on what that model or what that material does. So that'd be my hope for regulation, is that actually allows us to choose between feature sets that we want rather than forcing people to create feature sets. So, yeah.
I would like to answer the portion in which dangers of AI, current issues. I was going through a recent study that evaluates ChatGPT based on the theory of minds that suggests that the current 3.5 version of ChatGPT represents a 9-year-old. So that means it's innocent, it's new to interaction, and it's trying to answer as best of its knowledge to satisfy the next person. So whenever we interact with ChatGPT, we have different prompts and the query way that can trigger different kind of responses. For instance, you can manipulate your query in such a way that it can bypass the existing implemented content filtering mechanisms that is implemented by OpenAI. For instance, in our previous experiment, we have done this in which we played interactive games with ChatGPT and trigger it into creating content that it would not create otherwise. So this is what it has to put.
Any-
Yeah, sorry. There we go. Just building off of what Zia said, I think that the easier the technology becomes, the more user friendly it becomes, that the more with its advent across not just let's say the United States, but just across the entire world. I think that we're not gonna be concerned with in terms of safety issues as we're gonna be more concerned with institutional regulation of the interaction between individuals and the machine. And I think that's the challenge that we have ahead, where let's say, how do I know that if I text you, it's not the AI that's going to text me back, that I'm actually going to be talking to you, and that's, I think, where people will be concerned with, especially when it comes to, let's say, if we're to be using it with, so like for me, for example, I dislike the fact that I have to speak to a customer service representative online using like a chat box, and I'm not really sure if this is a true person or not. Whether if I can pick up the phone and talk to someone, I can tell, but who knows in the future what could happen. But yeah, I think that given the era and the circumstances that we're in, I think that regulation and all those in terms of solutions should be just to the localities and that.
Excellent. Anybody have anything else they want to add? Excellent. Do we have any more questions from in the room? We do have a few more online, but definitely want to come back. It looks like there's one in the front here.
I'm really enjoying this. This has just been really well spent time. With regards to regulation, and I'm not a student in this field, but historical governments, especially in a fallen world, the one that seems, in my opinion, to have worked the best is the one that's called a constitutional republic, where you have the legislative, where you have from the ground up ideas, milled over, discussed, referred out to committee, blah, 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 Robert's Rules of Order. Then you have the judicial for interpretation. And then you have the executive for, okay, let's aim and fire here. Let's bring it down. The phrase checks and balances only applies and is used in a constitutional republic, to my knowledge. So just taking simple words like check. Well, my wife will say, Steve, did you check that? Oh, yeah. Are you sure? Well, what did you do? Okay, here it is. All right. Okay, let's do it. But then there's a balance of power. And why a constitutional republic I'm a big fan of is that if there's never such a thing as a totally free market or a total market of free ideas, but there's a greater chance that cream can rise to the top with transparency with as much of a, and this is the other word, balance. You know, I went on this dirty, called low maintenance road to go out and see my friend out in a farmstead by Davenport. And when I got so much mud on my tires, I was now concerned about how I was going to get out of this. But when I was driving back on the interstate, I couldn't go faster than 45 miles an hour because I thought my wheels were going to come apart because all the mud, and it wasn't balanced. And check and balance sounds so simple, and yet it's profound. So I really appreciate that discussion, because when it talks about what is the goal, the objective, it goes back to the values, but what are the values? What are the motivation for the values? Are they transcendent? Are they imminent? And I think that you guys have done just a fabulous job. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thanks. Does anybody have anything that they want to mention in response to that?
This is really interesting. Thank you. Thank you very much for adding the information. I just think of the last point when there was the first time calculator introduced. Do you guys know there were so many protests of professors, teachers, people that this is not valid, this is not legal, this would have severe impact on students and things like that. Reimagine that scenario. So this is what's happening now.
You
in the
know,
AI.
There were initially calls to regulate electricity in its advent, right? It's dangerous. It could electrocute and kill you. You don't want that. Now it's everywhere, right? I mean, it's right here, it's right there, everywhere, pretty much. So it'll be interesting to see whether AI has a similar, experience.
Excellent. Anything you want to add? Or you?
Right? No,
All right.
they've said it very well, so.
Excellent. Well, we only have about 5 minutes left. But there is we actually again have a few questions that I'm going to group together about AI, religion, and the implications of regulating AI if it's being used for religious purposes. So again, I would kind of bring together a few of these questions and maybe hopefully concisely phrase it as this: is what ways do you see AI being perhaps involved in religion and the practice of religion? And if the answer to that is something, right? What would that then do to the regulatory environment for AI technologies and particularly for AI technologies being used in the pursuit of religion?
Well, I suppose, like most things, it really depends on the context in which it's being used in a religion setting, right? If you're using it for something religious, the same way you use it for something like learning calculus, then yeah, absolutely. I mean, use it for doing whatever as an educational resource in a religious context. Use it for the administrators of churches or what have you to organize their documentation and stuff. I can't really think of a reason as to why you'd want to regulate AI in the context of religion differently than other domains, but the other panelists want to talk about it.
So I think it depends on the person's using the AI or the technology within the context. So is it for example, and when I assume religion, I assume so like organized religion, for example, as an institution. So if it's, so like, it depends on the application of it. So for example, are we using artificial intelligence, let's say in a way that's deemed to be non-religious, or that's, breaking your rules or whatnot? Or is it in the way that you're using it in a religious institution and you're using it to, for example, to find more efficient ways to share your religious word? Is that how the question is?
Well,
Or
I think the question left that open to some interpretation. I mean, I think, and again, there were actually kind of a few questions that I brought together into that one, but I think certainly, it could be anything from, maybe the administration of religion, like Dominic mentioned, to, I mean, if you imagine, having the customer service rep that somebody mentioned earlier, could you then, automate parts of a religious experience? I mean, is that something that somebody might want to try? And, again, what would the implications of that
I
be?
think overall, a little add-on is that it would really be at the discretion of the organization in question, because we have that concept of, separation of church and state, would AI regulations really translate to anything, religious? Right, so a specific church or a specific denomination, what have you, may decide that certain AI applications are more appropriate than others in different contexts. So I think, in short, it really just depends on the church, on the organization in question.
Yeah, and sorry, Azia, just to add to that, I think that it's not going to differ much more than, let's say, any other technology. So for example, so I'm Muslim. My mom was visiting for Thanksgiving and she had forgotten her Quran. So it's like a big book like the Bible. And so she just pulled out her phone and she was able to, read the Quran from her phone. And so I think it'll be similar in that way. But now if we're talking generative AI, that's going to be something different. But I guess from a administration of religion perspective, I don't think it's going to be much different than, let's say, other pieces of tech.
No, absolutely. Like use it for religion, same as using it for calculus, right? You don't
Yes.
use it in isolation
Yes.
because it can come up with stuff. It wasn't necessarily designed to be accurate. It was designed to sound as human as possible.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, these are really interesting point. I would add into that. For instance, if we ask the AI questions about certain things, for instance, the calculus, the physics, the chemistry, there are certain formulas, laws of nature that are specific, that do not vary. They're consistent in every part of the world. But religion is something that mostly works on beliefs, on culture, on ethics. So there are highly chances of biased results based on what kind of data it is trained on, based on what kind of information fed into the system. So there are highly chances of biased. Direct reliance would be tricky, I believe.
And that's a really good point, is like language models especially follow the garbage in, garbage out rule. Garbage in being the data that's used to train it, and the data that's used to train it comes from humans. Humans are inherently biased, right? There's no way we can have a completely neutral view on everything that there is. So because of our inherent biasness, a lot of that is going to translate over to these language models. So again, that goes back to the discretion of the organization.
Excellent. Well, and with that, we are exactly at time. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you also to Scott, who had to run here a few minutes early. For those in the room here, we have about 45 minutes for lunch. Lunch is served buffet style behind us all here. I guess actually behind you all. You don't have to go outside the wall, which would be behind me. So please go help yourself. We'll start up again here right after lunch at 1 p.m. For those online, we'll obviously leave the feed on, but we won't have anything on it for the next 45 minutes or so. So we hope that everybody online will stay with us and join us back again after lunch when our next panel will be discussing AI in professions. Another really excellent topic. Again, let's thank our panelists though. And with that, lunch is served.